You love cameras, Carla. Good. Now they love me back. The power went out at exactly 7:43 p.m. Just as I was opening my third beer and wondering why my wife Carla's business trips had become as frequent as my mortgage payments. The house plunged into darkness, and for a moment, I sat there in my recliner, listening to the silence where the hum of electricity used to be. Perfect, I muttered, feeling around for my phone's flashlight. Just freaking perfect. The beam cut through the darkness of our living room, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and the stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table. Carla had been on me about fixing up the house, making it presentable for her law firm colleagues. Fat chance of that happening on a contractor's salary while she spent our savings on designer suits and mysterious weekend conferences. I made my way down to the basement, stepping carefully on the creaky wooden stairs. The flashlight beam danced across the concrete walls, revealing the usual collection of forgotten Christmas decorations and broken appliances that I kept meaning to fix. The electrical panel was in the far corner behind a stack of paint cans that had been there since we moved in 8 years ago. As I moved the cans aside, something didn't look right. The wall behind them seemed different somehow. I ran my hand along the concrete and felt a slight depression, like a seam. My contractor instincts kicked in and I realized what I was looking at. There was a hidden room behind this wall. The next morning, I called my old friend Lenny Morrison, the best electrician in town, and the only guy I trusted with my house's ancient wiring. Lenny showed up around 10 o'clock, carrying his toolbox and wearing that same grease-stained baseball cap he'd had since high school. "So, what's the problem, Danny?" he asked, following me down to the basement. "Carla finally decided to electrocute you in your sleep. Very funny. The power went out last night and I found something weird down here." I showed him the seam in the wall. Lenny whistled low and pulled out a small hammer, tapping along the concrete. "This is hollow," he said. "Looks like someone sealed up a room back here. Want me to break through?" "Do it." It took Lenny about 20 minutes with a sledgehammer to create a hole big enough to crawl through. The smell that came out was musty and stale, like air that had been trapped for years. I squeezed through first, my flashlight beam revealing a small room, maybe 8 by 10 feet. What I found inside made my blood run cold. There were photographs taped to the walls, dozens of them. Pictures of Carla with a man I recognized as Travis Kellerman, the project manager at her law firm. They were in compromising positions, some of them taken right here in our house, in our bedroom. There was a small desk with a laptop, stacks of love letters, and a shoebox filled with lingerie I'd never seen Carla wear. But the worst part was the camera equipment. Professional stuff with long lenses and recording devices. Someone had been documenting my wife's affair in excruciating detail. "Jesus Christ, Danny," Lenny whispered behind me. "What the heck is this?" I picked up one of the letters, my hands shaking. It was in Carla's handwriting, addressed to my darling T. The content was explicit enough to make me sick. She wrote about how boring I was, how she couldn't wait to be free of our pathetic little life and move on to something better. "How long do you think this has been going on?" I asked. Lenny examined the camera equipment. "This stuff's expensive, professional grade. I'd say at least a year, maybe longer." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Danny, I hate to tell you this, but I've seen Travis around your neighborhood before. Usually when you're at work and Carla's supposed to be at the office." I felt something dark and cold settling in my chest. Not just anger, but something deeper. A calculating fury that I'd never experienced before. "You know what the worst part is, Lenny?" "What?" "That I didn't install any of these cameras, which means someone else has been watching, too. I spent the next 3 days going through everything in that hidden room while Carla was at another one of her conferences. The deeper I dug, the more elaborate the betrayal became. There were receipts for hotel rooms, restaurant bills, even jewelry purchases that I'd never seen. My wife had been living a completely separate life, funded by our joint savings account. But the real bombshell was hidden in a manila folder at the bottom of the desk drawer. Legal documents, divorce papers already filled out and notarized, just waiting for signatures, a restraining order application, claiming that I was emotionally and physically harmful and aggressive, character witness statements from people I thought were friends, describing me as unstable and violent. The coup grace was a psychological evaluation report supposedly documenting my dangerous behavior patterns and recommending that I be removed from the home immediately. It was signed by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Carla's best friend since law school. They weren't just planning to end our marriage. They were planning to destroy me completely. I called in sick to work and spent the day making copies of everything, storing the originals in a safety deposit box across town. If Carla wanted to play dirty, she was about to learn that an underestimated contractor could be far more dangerous than any smooth-hulking lawyer. The first step was surveillance. I borrowed a van from my business partner and started following Travis. The guy was predictable as clockwork. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he'd leave the law firm at exactly 5:30 and drive to the Riverside Motel on the outskirts of town. He'd wait in room 237 until Carla showed up around 6 o'clock. On Thursday evening, I decided to send my first message. I waited until they were both inside, then went to work on Travis's precious BMW. I keyed a long scratch down the driver's side, then stuffed raw shrimp deep into the exhaust pipe. The smell would be unbearable once the car heated up. For the finishing touch, I left a note under his windshield wiper. Next time, try a different socket. A concerned electrician. The next morning, Carla came home in a foul mood, slamming doors and muttering about juvenile pranks. She didn't know I was watching from the kitchen window as she made a hushed phone call in the driveway, probably to Travis. "Problems at work, honey?" I asked innocently when she came inside. "Some idiot vandalized Travis's car last night. The police think it might be related to a case he's working on." "That's terrible. I hope they catch whoever did it." She looked at me suspiciously, but I kept my expression neutral. 20 years of marriage had taught me how to hide my thoughts from Carla when necessary. That weekend was the law firm's annual summer gala, a fancy charity dinner that Carla had been looking forward to for months. She'd bought a new dress, made an appointment at the salon, the whole 9 yards. She assumed I'd skip it like I usually did, claiming I had nothing to wear and didn't fit in with her colleagues. This year, I surprised her. I showed up at the country club in my best suit, the one I'd worn to my father's funeral. Carla's face went white when she saw me walk into the ballroom. Travis, standing next to her with a drink in his hand, looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Danny," Carla said, her voice pitched too high. "I didn't think you were coming. Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. This is Travis, right? I've heard so much about you." I extended my hand to Travis, gripping his fingers just a little too hard. He winced and pulled away quickly. "Nice to finally meet you," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Likewise, Carla talks about you constantly. She says you two work very closely together." The evening progressed with painful small talk and forced smiles. I made sure to stay close to Carla and Travis, inserting myself into every conversation, making subtle comments that only they would understand. When the time came for toasts, I volunteered to speak. "I'd like to raise a glass," I said, standing at the microphone. "To all the hard-working people who keep the lights on in this town, to the power couples who know how to make real connections." I looked directly at Travis. "Here's to never getting burned by a faulty wire." The applause was polite but confused. Travis had gone pale, and Carla was gripping her wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. After the dinner, I followed them out to the parking lot, staying far enough back to avoid detection. I watched as they had what looked like a heated argument next to Travis's repaired BMW. Carla kept pointing at the hotel across the street, but Travis was shaking his head vigorously. Finally, he got in his car and drove away, leaving my wife standing alone under the streetlight. When I got home, there was an envelope slipped under our front door. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "If you want to know the real truth about what's been happening in your house, check this out. A friend." I plugged the drive into my laptop and nearly dropped it when I saw what was on it. Video files, dozens of them, showing the interior of our house from multiple angles. Our bedroom, the living room, even the kitchen. Someone had been recording everything that happened in our home for months. But here's what really made my blood run cold. I could see myself in some of these videos, going about my daily routine, completely unaware that I was being watched. Whoever set up that hidden room hadn't just been documenting Carla's affair. They'd been documenting my entire life. The last video file was dated just 3 days ago. It showed me discovering the hidden room, going through the evidence, making copies of everything. Whoever was watching knew exactly what I'd found and what I was planning to do about it. I was being played by someone much smarter than my cheating wife and her boyfriend. The question was, who? The answer came sooner than I expected. The next morning, I was in my workshop behind the house trying to make sense of the surveillance footage when Dr. Jennifer Walsh knocked on my door. Carla's best friend since law school, the woman who'd signed those psychological evaluation papers, calling me dangerous and unstable. "Hello, Danny," she said, smiling that same condescending smile I'd been seeing for 15 years. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "Sure, Jen, come on in." She looked around my workshop with obvious distaste, taking in the power tools and sawdust, the half-finished cabinet projects and electrical equipment that Lenny had left behind. "I wanted to talk to you about Carla," she said. "She's been very stressed lately, and I'm concerned about her well-being." "Stressed about what?" "Well, she feels like you've been acting strangely, following her, showing up places unexpectedly. She's worried that you might be having some kind of breakdown." I set down the piece of wood I'd been sanding and looked at her directly. "Is that your professional opinion, doctor?" "I'm speaking as a friend, not a therapist, but yes, I think you might benefit from talking to someone. I could recommend a colleague like the colleague who wrote up that psychological evaluation without ever meeting me." Her smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do, Jen. Just like you know about the cameras in my house and the little love nest my wife's been maintaining with Travis Kellerman." She stood up quickly, knocking over the folding chair she'd been sitting in. "Danny, I think you're confused. Maybe we should call Carla." "Carla's not here. She's at another one of her conferences. Funny how those conferences always seem to happen at the same hotel where Travis likes to spend his evenings." Jennifer's face had gone pale, but she was trying to maintain her composure. "I don't know anything about that, but I do know that making accusations and threats isn't going to help your marriage. My marriage ended the day my wife decided to be with another man in our bed and documented for posterity. The question is, what's your role in all this, Jen? Are you just the character witness, or are you the one pulling the strings?" She backed toward the door, her professional facade cracking. "You're scaring me, Danny. This is exactly the kind of behavior Carla was talking about." "Good. You should be scared because I know about the divorce papers, the restraining order, the whole elaborate plan to paint me as a harmful and controlling husband. I know about the cameras, the surveillance, everything. What I don't know yet is why you're involved. I'm trying to help my friend Bees. Friends don't help each other commit fraud and perjury. There's something else going on here, and I'm going to find out what it is." She practically ran out of my workshop, fumbling with her car keys as she hurried to her Mercedes. I watched her drive away, my mind racing. Jennifer Walsh wasn't just Carla's friend and accomplice. She was the mastermind behind the whole operation, but why? What did she gain from destroying my marriage? The answer came to me that evening while I was going through the surveillance footage again. In one of the videos from about 6 months ago, I saw Carla and Jennifer in our living room having what looked like an intense conversation. I'd been at work, so I had no idea what they'd discussed, but their body language suggested it was serious. I enhanced the audio and played it back through headphones. What I heard made everything click into place. "Can't keep doing this," Carla was saying. "Danny's going to find out eventually." "No, he won't," Jennifer replied. "He's too trusting, too. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." "But what if he fights the divorce? What if he doesn't believe the misuse allegations? That's what the evidence is for. The photos, the recordings, the psychological evaluation. We'll paint him as an unstable, violent man who can't be trusted around you. The judge will have no choice but to grant the restraining order and award you the house. And then we sell it and split the proceeds. Your half plus the insurance money from Danny's accident should be more than enough for us to start over somewhere else." Insurance money from my accident. They weren't just planning to divorce me and take everything I owned. They were planning to end me and make it look accidental. I sat back in my chair feeling a cold rage settle over me like a blanket. My wife and her best friend weren't just cheaters and liars. They would be those willing to take a life, and I was their target. Well, if they wanted to play for keeps, I was ready to show them what a real predator looked like. The next morning, I called my insurance company and made some inquiries about my life insurance policy. Sure enough, there had been several recent calls asking about the payout process, the documentation required, and the timeline for claims processing. The calls had come from a number I recognized, Jennifer Walsh's office. I also checked our joint bank accounts and discovered that Carla had been slowly siphoning money into a separate account that I didn't have access to. Small amounts at first, but increasingly larger withdrawals over the past few months. She was building a nest egg for her new life, funded by my labor and our shared assets. It was time to turn the tables. I started with Travis because he was the weakest link in their chain. I'd been watching him long enough to know his routines, his habits, his vulnerabilities. The man was vain, insecure, and completely dependent on his reputation at the law firm. So, I decided to destroy that reputation. I created a fake email account and started sending anonymous tips to the firm's human resources department. Photos of Travis leaving the motel with married women. Copies of expense reports showing personal charges on company accounts. Audio. Recordings of him making inappropriate comments about female colleagues taken from the surveillance footage of his meetings with Carla. Within a week, Travis was called into a disciplinary hearing. Within 2 weeks, he was on administrative leave pending a full investigation. His access to the firm's files was revoked. His company credit cards were cancelled. And his future at the firm was looking very dim indeed. But that was just the appetizer. Travis started calling our house at all hours, desperate and panicked. I made sure to answer the phone whenever he called, speaking in my most pleasant, helpful voice. "Danny, I need to talk to Carla," he'd say, his voice tight with stress. "She's not available right now, Travis. Can I take a message? This is important. There are things happening at work, accusations being made. That sounds serious. Have you considered hiring a good attorney? I hear my wife is excellent, though she's been pretty busy with her caseload lately. You don't understand. Someone's been spreading lies about me, sabotaging my career. That's terrible, Travis. Who would do such a thing? Do you have any enemies?" The conversations always ended with him hanging up in frustration. Carla would get similar calls on her cell phone, which led to hushed, frantic conversations in our bedroom. I could hear her through the thin walls trying to calm him down, promising that everything would work out. But everything was not going to work out. Not for them. My next target was Jennifer Walsh. I'd done some research into her practice and discovered that she'd been having her own ethical problems. Several former patients had filed complaints with the state medical board, alleging that she'd violated doctor-patient confidentiality and engaged in inappropriate relationships with clients. I reached out to those former patients posing as an investigative journalist working on a story about professional misconduct. What I learned was deeply troubling. Jennifer had a pattern of manipulating vulnerable clients, using their personal information for her own gain and covering her tracks with falsified records. Armed with this information, I made an anonymous complaint to the medical board, providing detailed documentation of Jennifer's violations. I also sent copies of the evidence to the local newspaper investigative reporter along with a tip about her involvement in insurance fraud schemes. Within days, Jennifer's office was swarmed with investigators. Her patient files were seized, her computers confiscated, and her medical license was suspended pending a full review. The story made the front page of the local paper, complete with photos of investigators carrying boxes of evidence out of her office. But the real masterstroke was yet to come. I'd been studying the surveillance footage for weeks, looking for patterns and opportunities. I knew when Carla and Travis met, where they went, what they did. I also knew that they'd grown careless, confident that their plan was working perfectly. They had no idea that I'd been 3 steps ahead of them from the beginning. On a Thursday evening in late September, I put my final plan into motion. I knew that Carla and Travis would be at the Riverside Motel, probably discussing their next move now that their carefully constructed scheme was falling apart. I also knew that Jennifer would be at her office, desperately trying to salvage her career and avoid criminal charges. I started by calling the police and reporting suspicious activity at the motel. I described seeing people coming and going from room 237 at odd hours, carrying what looked like pills or stolen merchandise. I gave them Travis's license plate number and suggested they might want to investigate. Then I called the fire department and reported a gas leak in the building that housed Jennifer's office. I described smelling natural gas in the hallway and seeing people evacuating the building. That would keep her busy for several hours while investigators searched for a leak that didn't exist. With both of my targets occupied, I went to work on the real objective, our house. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, moving our most valuable possessions to a storage unit across town, making copies of all important documents, and setting up a new bank account in my name only. Tonight, I was going to end this game once and for all. I started in the hidden room, removing all the surveillance equipment and evidence of Carla's affair. Then, I moved to our bedroom, packing her clothes and personal items into boxes. Everything went into my van, destined for the storage unit. But the real surprise was waiting in our joint bank accounts. Over the past month, I'd been slowly transferring money into my personal account, using the same gradual approach that Carla had employed. By the time she realized what was happening, I'd moved nearly $50,000 out of her reach. I also canceled our joint credit cards, removed her name from our utility accounts, and changed the locks on the house. When Carla came home from her rendezvous with Travis, she was going to find herself locked out of her own life. But I wasn't done yet. The piece of the resistance that was waiting on the kitchen table, a manila envelope containing copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, photos of her affair, transcripts of her conversations with Jennifer, documentation of their plan to frame me for misuse, and collect on my life insurance policy. Along with the evidence was a letter I'd written explaining exactly what I discovered and what I'd done about it. I detailed Travis's firing, Jennifer's professional disgrace, and the steps I'd taken to protect myself from their scheme. The letter ended with a simple message. If you want to destroy someone, make sure you know who you're dealing with first. Game over. Danny. I left the house at exactly 9:30 p.m. Just as Carla's car was pulling into the driveway. I watched from across the street as she tried her key in the front door, then rattled the handle in confusion. I saw her pull out her phone and make a frantic call, probably to Travis or Jennifer. Neither of them would be able to help her now. The next few days were chaos. Carla stayed at a hotel, calling me constantly and demanding that I let her back into the house. Travis was fired from the law firm and served with a lawsuit for embezzlement and misconduct of a personal nature harassment. Jennifer's medical license was permanently revoked, and she was facing criminal charges for insurance fraud and conspiracy. But they weren't finished yet. Desperate people do desperate things, and I knew they'd try one last gambit to salvage their plan. The call came on a Sunday morning. Detective Ray Harkness from the local police department wanted to meet with me about some serious allegations that had been made against me. Carla had filed a formal complaint claiming that I'd threatened her, stolen her property, and violated a restraining order that didn't actually exist. I agreed to meet Detective Harkness at the police station, bringing my lawyer and all of my evidence with me. Harkness was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with the tired look of someone who'd seen every kind of human stupidity imaginable. "Mr. Patterson," he said, settling into a chair across from me in the interview room. "Your wife has made some pretty serious accusations. She says you've been stalking her, threatening her boyfriend, and engaging in harassment and intimidation. Detective, I think you'll find that the situation is considerably more complex than my wife has indicated." I opened my briefcase and began laying out the evidence, the photos from the hidden room, the surveillance footage, the forged psychological evaluation, the insurance fraud scheme, the plan to have me ended and make it look like an accident. Harkness's expression grew more serious as he reviewed the materials. He asked detailed questions about how I'd obtained the evidence. When I discovered the hidden room and what steps I'd taken to protect myself. "This is quite a story, Mr. Patterson," he said finally. "If even half of this is true, you're the victim here, not the perpetrator." "It's all true, Detective, and it's all documented. I have witnesses, financial records, medical board complaints, everything you need to verify my claims." "What about the allegations your wife made, the stalking, the threats?" "I followed my wife's boyfriend to gather evidence of their affair, which is legal. I confronted him once verbally, which is also legal. I changed the locks on my own house and moved my wife's belongings to storage, which is my right as the homeowner. I haven't violated any laws or court orders." Harkness nodded slowly. "And the restraining order, she mentioned, doesn't exist. It's part of a collection of forged legal documents that she and her accomplices prepared to use against me. You can verify that with the court clerk." The detective spent another hour going through the evidence, making notes, and asking follow-up questions. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "Mr. Patterson, in 30 years of police work, I've never seen anything quite like this. Your wife and her friends didn't just commit adultery. They committed fraud, conspiracy, attempted homicide, and a dozen other felonies. What happens now? Now I arrest them. All of them." The arrests happened simultaneously. Carla was taken into custody at her hotel. Travis was arrested at his apartment. Jennifer was arrested at her lawyer's office where she'd been trying to negotiate a plea deal for her medical board violations. The charges were extensive: conspiracy to commit homicide, insurance fraud, perjury, forgery, embezzlement, and criminal harassment. The evidence was overwhelming, and none of them had credible defenses. But I wasn't satisfied with just seeing them arrested. I wanted them to understand exactly how completely they'd been outmaneuvered. I arranged to meet with each of them before their trials, ostensibly to discuss possible plea agreements. In reality, I wanted to look them in the eye and explain how they'd been beaten at their own game. Travis was first. He looked terrible when they brought him into the visitor's room at the county jail. His expensive suit had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit, and his confident demeanor had crumbled into desperate panic. "Danny, thank God," he said, sitting down across from me. "This is all a misunderstanding. Carl and we never meant for things to go this far. Save it, Travis. I know about the insurance money. I know about the plan to make my death look accidental. I know everything." His face went white. "That was Jennifer's idea, not ours. Carla and I just wanted a divorce. Bees. You wanted me dead so you could take my house, my money, and my life. But you made one crucial mistake." "What mistake?" "You underestimated me. You thought I was just some dumb contractor who wouldn't notice his wife cheating. You thought I'd roll over and let you destroy me without fighting back. Danny, please. If you drop the charges, I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." "The charges aren't mine to drop, Travis. They're criminal charges filed by the state. You're going to prison for a long time, and there's nothing I can do to change that, even if I wanted to." I stood up to leave, then turned back for one final comment. "By the way, Travis, your BMW was repossessed yesterday. Apparently, you missed a few payments while you were busy planning my homicide." Jennifer was next. The former doctor looked haggard and defeated when she shuffled into the visitor's room, her hands shackled to a chain around her waist. "You son of a witch," she said, glaring at me with undisguised hatred. "You destroyed my life." "No, Jennifer, you destroyed your own life. I just made sure everyone found out about it. I was trying to help my friend. You were trying to commit homicide for money. Don't dress it up as friendship." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won. I know I've won. You're going to prison. Your career is over. Your reputation is ruined. Your co-conspirators have already started blaming you for everything. I'd say that's a pretty decisive victory. This isn't over, Danny. When I get out, when you get out, you'll be a 60-year-old ex-convict with no money, no career, and no friends. I'll be living in my house, running my business, and enjoying my life. This is very much over, Jennifer." Finally, there was Carla, my wife of 20 years, the woman I'd loved and trusted and built a life with. She looked smaller somehow in her jail uniform, diminished by the weight of her crimes and the collapse of her elaborate scheme. "Hello, Danny," she said quietly when she sat down across from me. "Hello, Carla. I suppose you're here to gloat. Actually, I'm here to ask you a question. Why? We had a good life together. We had a nice house, financial security, a future. Why did you throw it all away?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "Because I was bored, Danny. Bored with our life, bored with our routine, bored with being married to a contractor who was satisfied with mediocrity. So, you decided to have me ended. That was Jennifer's idea. I just wanted a divorce, but she convinced me that you'd fight it, that you'd make things difficult. She said it would be easier if you just weren't around anymore. Easier for who, Carla? For you or for the insurance company that would have to pay out $1 million death benefit? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. You know what the funny thing is? I continued. If you just asked for a divorce, I probably would have given it to you. We could have split everything fairly, gone our separate ways, maybe even stayed friends. Instead, you chose to destroy both of our lives. I know, she whispered. I know I made a mistake. You made a lot of mistakes, Carla, but the biggest one was thinking I was too stupid to figure out what you were doing. I stood up to leave, then paused at the door. By the way, I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. Don't worry about hiring a lawyer. You won't be able to afford one anyway. 3 months later, I was a free man in every sense of the word. The divorce was finalized with me keeping the house and most of our assets. Carla, Travis, and Jennifer had all been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The insurance companies had dropped their investigations after determining that no actual fraud had been committed against them. I thought the story was over. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday evening in December. Detective Harkness wanted to meet with me again, this time about new developments in the case. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, curious about what could possibly be left to discuss. Patterson, he said, settling into a booth across from me. We've had some interesting conversations with your wife and her co-conspirators since they've been in prison. Oh, it seems they're claiming that you orchestrated the whole thing. That you set them up, manipulated them into committing crimes so you could destroy them and take everything for yourself. I sipped my coffee and considered this. That's an interesting theory, detective. Do you believe it? I'm not sure what to believe. The evidence clearly shows that they committed the crimes they were convicted of, but some of the details are suspicious. Such as how you managed to discover that hidden room at exactly the right time, how you happened to receive anonymous tips that led you to crucial evidence, how you always seem to be one step ahead of their plans. I smiled. Detective, are you suggesting that I'm some kind of criminal mastermind? I'm suggesting that you're a lot smarter than you let on. The question is, how smart? I leaned back in the booth, studying Harkness's weathered face. He was fishing, looking for something that would make sense of the nagging doubts that had been bothering him for months. Detective, let me ask you something. If I had orchestrated this whole thing, if I had manipulated my wife and her friends into committing crimes so I could destroy them, would that make me a criminal? That would depend on exactly what you did and how you did it. But hypothetically, if I had simply provided them with opportunities to reveal their true nature, if I had documented their crimes and turned the evidence over to the proper authorities, would that be illegal? No, it wouldn't be illegal, but it would make you a very dangerous man. I finished my coffee and stood up. Detective, my wife tried to have me ended so she could steal my money and run away with her boyfriend. Her best friend, a licensed psychologist, helped her forge documents and plan my homicide. Her boyfriend embezzled money from his law firm and engaged in inappropriate conduct toward his colleagues. These are not good people who were led astray. These are criminals who got caught. And you had nothing to do with that. I had everything to do with it. I gathered evidence. I protected myself and I made sure that justice was served. If that makes me dangerous, then I suppose I'm dangerous. I left Harkness sitting in the coffee shop staring into his empty cup and trying to figure out exactly what kind of men he'd been dealing with. The truth was more complex than he could imagine. I had discovered the hidden room by accident, but everything that followed had been carefully planned and executed. I'd received anonymous tips, but only because I'd sent them to myself using untraceable email accounts and burner phones. I had stayed one step ahead of their plans because I'd been monitoring their communications and predicting their moves. Most importantly, I hadn't manipulated them into committing crimes. I'd simply created situations where their existing criminal intentions would be exposed and documented. Carla had been planning to divorce me and take everything long before I started fighting back. Jennifer had been manipulating clients and violating professional ethics for years. Travis had been embezzling from his law firm and harassing female colleagues since he was hired. All I'd done was make sure their crimes came to light in a way that protected me and destroyed them. Was that manipulation? Perhaps. Was it justice? Absolutely. 6 months later, I received a letter from Carla in prison. She'd been thinking about our conversation, she wrote. And she wanted me to know that she understood what I'd done. She wasn't angry anymore and just impressed by the elegance of my revenge. "You played us perfectly," she wrote. "You made us think we were the hunters when we were really the prey. You let us dig our own graves and then handed us the shovels. I have to admit, Danny, I never knew you had it in you." She was right. I'd never known I had it in me either. But when someone tries to destroy your life, steal your money, and have you having your life taken, you discover capabilities you never knew you possessed. You learn that the quiet, unassuming contractor can be far more dangerous than the smooth-talking lawyer or the manipulative psychologist. You learn that the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting even. I folded Carla's letter and put it in the filing cabinet with all the other evidence from the case. Then I went back to my workshop where I was building a new kitchen table to replace the one where I'd left that final envelope for my cheating wife. The house was quiet and peaceful now, free of surveillance cameras and hidden rooms and whispered conspiracies. It was mine, completely and legally, along with the money and the business and the life that Carla had tried to steal. I'd won not just the battle, but the war. And the best part was I'd done it all without breaking a single law.